Good morning, folks. Welcome to our December general membership meeting for the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness, also known as our annual and fabulous legislative preview as we gear up and get excited for the 2025 long legislative session that's going to start in early January. Welcome, welcome. We are recording this meeting. I believe it's already being transcribed, but if you need transcription, you should be able to find that along the bottom of your Zoom screen, possibly in the 3 ellipses more, and ping one of us at the coalition if you need any technical support. We will work on getting this recording up into our YouTube channel as quickly as possible. So we'll drop that link into the chat for you. We have a really fabulous and packed agenda, but we're going to do just a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into that. We love to see faces. We love to see names, pronouns, how you're associated with the coalition or the work. You can change your Zoom name in your box, introduce yourself in the chat. If you do not want to be included in the recording, please just stay on mute and throw your comments or your questions into the chat. We will be monitoring that and get that into the meeting and into the community discussion. If you are from the media, we just ask that you check in with the coalition or, quote from coalition staff or any of our official presenters. And if there's somebody else has made an interesting comment or you want to follow up with them, please reach out to one of the coalition staff and we can help get you in touch with that agency and the appropriate person there. So thank you all for being here. One last little plug. We have launched a real short member needs survey. It closes tomorrow at 5 p.m. The first 100 participants that provide us contact information will receive a $25 gift card. This is really us doing a temperature check. How are you doing? A lot has been happening in the budget season locally. Obviously, a huge change is happening at the federal level that has left a lot of us feeling frightened, uncertain, unsteady. And we want to know what brings you to the coalition, what keeps you in this work, and how can we support you moving forward as we move into 2025. It's just a handful of questions, shouldn't take more than like 10 minutes. And that closes tomorrow. So please share that with your staff and colleagues. And we would love to hear from you all.
And Jody, is there something else about the survey that folks should know? Like an incentive for
Oh,
people?
I said that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I was like, am I missing something else? But I'll say it again. It's worth repeating.
Listen to Jen.
$25 gift certificate for the first 100 respondents. You can take it anonymously if you really have feedback that you want to put in and don't want to be associated with for whatever reason. But we do need your contact information to get you that gift card. Gift card to where? I think we've landed on Starbucks is where we've landed. So, and we figured that kind of really covers the county and can be used online or in person. So it gave us the flexibility to get folks where they're needed and make it easy for them to use it. So jumping in to our agenda today, our legislative preview, we are really excited to welcome Representatives Emily Alvarado and Strom Peterson. They're going to be sharing some of the work that they are going to be, the priorities they're going to be working on in the legislative session. And a lot of that is continuing work from last year's legislative session. So there might be some familiarity there and some work that you have already been engaged in. Then we're going to have the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance and Statewide Poverty Action Network, as well as Civil Survival, sharing some of the work that they're doing in the 2025 legislative session. And then we're going to do some easy advocacy training, and we're going to engage you all in a really fun action that we'll be able to take together. And then we will move into, coalition announcements and then any announcements that you all have. We're here for 2 hours together today, folks. So um, let's jump in and get going. I'm going to hand it off to Allison. Oh, right. Thank you. See,
Like,
not enough coffee this
um,
morning. We would like to invite someone to read our mission, vision, and values if there's a volunteer that would be willing to read that out for us.
and we love to encourage folks who might be joining the coalition for the first time, or possibly, oh, I don't know, former coalition staff members who are joining our meeting who might want to share the mission, vision, and values to ground us all in our collective work. And feel free to unmute yourselves or raise your hand. We can't see everyone on one screen.
Well, I am happy to do it as a former coalition staff member. Um, the mission of the coalition, we mobilize our community to challenge systemic causes of homelessness and advocate for housing justice. Vision, a region that acts on a shared sense of responsibility to ensure that everyone has a home, and our values, equity, justice, and collective action.
Thank you, Sarah Robbins. This is what we all need, folks, right? We need previous, current colleagues to keep us on track and keep us where we're going. So thank you all for that. Allison, I will turn it over to you to make our a formal introduction to our latest staff member.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I think we promised not formal. Um, but there are some things that we try to do as a group, including welcoming all of you as warmly as we would if we were in person with hot coffee to share with you and snacks, and also inviting people to share a little bit about themselves and what brings them to this work, as well as you know, uh, celebrating the fact that we, as an organization that was an all volunteer entity for 27 years, now have the small and mighty paid staff that we do. We're really, really excited to welcome Danielle Palmer Friedman to the coalition team in a new but longed for role of our communications lead. She's been with us since mid-September, and we just haven't had a chance on these meetings to introduce her or let her just briefly introduce herself. Many of you have had the pleasure of meeting her already, and I'll just invite you, Danielle, to say a little bit, and then we'll move into our legislative preview.
Hey everyone, I'm not the best at public speaking, but I am very happy to be here. It's been about 3 months since I've been at the coalition, and I've seen a lot happen so far. And I'm really happy to be in a collective of people working toward housing justice. I have a professional background in events and marketing. I have done contract work, freelance work, been a content creator, making easy, digestible content for the web. And I also have been a volunteer for Real Change for the past 4 or 5 years. And I take part in a mutual aid group. I've been doing that since 2020, April 2020. And I really believe in the mission of the coalition, and I believe that everybody should have a home and all the support that they need to survive, but also to thrive. And I'm really excited, like I said, to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. We're really very grateful and happy to have you be part of our team. And with that, we're grateful and happy to have lawmakers here today, staff for lawmakers, a wonderful range of people who do all kinds of work in this community and who have all kinds of personal and professional experience. So remember, this is shared space. We love to, especially when we get around to questions, prioritize, if it's possible, questions from folks who are themselves experiencing homelessness, have newly acquired housing stability, and folks who are doing frontline work. That's not to exclude anyone, it's just to try to prioritize those voices in our space. And I think that Hallie, our community policy manager, is going to open up our amazing legislative preview, and will help monitor the chat and try to facilitate getting as many questions answered as possible.
Yes, welcome so much, and thank you for joining our legislative preview. We have some fabulous housing champions with us in the House today. And so you'll hear from some state lawmakers as well as some of our partners in advocacy about sort of what's coming up during this legislative session that starts mid-January, and how we can all take action together to help support work towards housing and services for people experiencing homelessness. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Representative Emily Alvarado from the 34th. Rep Alvarado is a champion of all things housing. Really, really happy to have you today, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Hallie. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good to see you. I love coming to the coalition's meetings, so pleasure to share space with you today. I'm Emily Alvarado, represent the 34th Legislative District, which includes parts of Seattle. Actually, some folks don't know, starts all the way at City Hall and the Great Wheel, West Seattle, South Park in Georgetown, parts of unincorporated King County, White Center, parts of Burien and Vashon Island. I'm starting my second term in the legislature and am serving on the Housing, Local Government, and Capital Budget Committees, where a lot of action happens related to housing. So kicking off with a little bit of legislative preview, I know that Hallie asked me to talk about rent stabilization, which I can't wait to talk about, but I want to ground it a little bit in overview of what we're about to jump into. And, you know, I think Jody already mentioned some challenges and uncertainty at the federal level, some budgetary concerns and challenges at the local level. And at the state, well, we have a $10 billion budget deficit over the 4-year outlook. And so that really sets us up for some tough conversations. And it really is a kind of cloud that's hanging over us as we head into Olympia this session. I want to just share with people why I think we have, yeah, it's a B. I want to share with people why I think we have such a significant budget deficit, so we all can, you know, talk from the same script almost, which is that our state, you may have heard, has the second most regressive tax code in the country, second only to Florida. We don't usually like being next to Florida on lists. It means we're super heavily dependent on generating revenue from low and moderate income people. And in our state, it's especially true that we're reliant on low and middle income people buying things, being consumers, because we are a sales tax dependent state. And as you all know, on the front lines of the work in our community, everything's really expensive right now. Low income people are struggling more than ever to try to make ends meet. So consumer activity is not as high as we had anticipated in the past. That's a real driving force behind our budget. There are some folks who are going to say we've overspent, Democrats spend too much. I don't believe that's true. While we can always take a look at our budget and make sure that we're spending the right way and that we're being effective and efficient, I think it's really a matter of revenue, which is what's driving our challenges. And I know that I will be one of many folks who will be advocating for the kind of revenue, especially progressive revenue, that lets us continue to invest in housing and human services and public education and in helping everyone meet their basic needs and have safe and thriving communities. So that's an overarching framework. That said, we have some of the best Democratic majorities that we've had in the legislature. And I think we have a lot of lawmakers, including new lawmakers, who have talked to constituents in community, and they hear really clearly housing is the priority, not a priority, but really the priority. It's coming out on the top of the list in almost every study, every community you go to, any county, not just King County, every county across the state, this is a priority. So I think there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm to continue to find ways to make progress, to address and stem the tide of evictions that we're seeing at record levels, to help address the rising housing costs that we see, both for renters and for folks who are trying to buy homes, and to invest in our social service network. So saying all of that, I'll point out a few things. One, last year, we made the most progress we've ever made on moving forward a rent stabilization policy. I was proud to be able to take that on. It's been championed by so many people who have come before me and really championed by so many people in the community. That's why it moved, but we passed it off the House floor. This year, our goal, get it off the House floor quickly, and let's get it through the Senate and pass it into law. What this law will do is it'll cap rent increases on an annual basis, so you can't raise rent more than 7% each year. I think that's a really balanced and reasonable policy. I don't know that I could absorb 7% increases in my housing costs, honestly, year over year. But we're starting in a place that's reasonable. Landlords can continue to operate their properties, but tenants will have some level of stability and predictability across the state. It's a good policy. It is an important way to make sure that people have some ability to understand what's going to happen to their rent over time. But we can't pass it, honestly, without you all. You can't take anything for granted in Olympia, and just because you did one thing one year, it doesn't mean you do it again without a real groundswell of advocacy and engagement, calling your legislators. We have a lot of new folks in the legislature, as some folks maybe even saw just a few days ago. Tina Orwell went over to the Senate. We have a brand new representative from the 33rd district. So we need you to share stories of what you see on the ground, what you know is happening to people, to yourselves, to people you work with, and why this law is important. And I'll just say, given that the budget looks so bad, we need policies like rent stabilization, which cost almost nothing relative to its impact. This is a high impact, low cost policy. It's time we took action and passed it. So there are other things certainly we'll need to do on housing. I think Rep. Peterson is here to talk about some other legislation. And I see that Michelle is here from the Housing Alliance. I anticipate that someone will mention the huge shortfall in document recording fees and how we need massive advocacy to stave off cuts that will take us even farther backwards in seeing, in trying to make progress on ending homelessness. Right now, we're just going to be treading water. But rent stabilization, we can do this. We can't do it without you. There are people out there who believe that this policy, I'm just going to put out what the biggest opposition argument is, just so we're all armed with it. Biggest opposition argument is that people are nervous that rent stabilization impacts the ability to build new housing. And look, in a room like this, we all know we need more housing. We totally need more housing for people of all incomes. Absolutely. I don't believe that these two policies are at odds. And I think we become so reductive in this world so often. We both can build more housing and we can have reasonable limits on rent increases that help people today. We both can do policies that'll help us in the long term. As someone who has background in housing development, takes years to build housing, and we can put policies in place that can help people right now. And so I encourage people to, when you're advocating, if you're interested in making sure we see more housing in the community, share with people that you think this is a both and, not an either or. I will say I also am super pumped to be serving as vice chair on the capital budget committee in the House this session. And the capital budget is the one budget that's less desperate than all the other budgets. So we will be able to make investments there. As some of you know, we've made record investments in the Housing Trust Fund over the past few years. That's the key resource that builds affordable housing in our communities. Without it, we won't be able to build more housing. We have a lot of community partners who have housing that's ready to go and ready to be built, from supportive housing to housing that serves seniors to low-wage workers and families. The Housing Trust Fund is crucial for that. I know as vice chair, I'll be working to keep an eye to make sure that we continue those investments. Again, it's something that I can't do without your support. It takes advocacy and hearing from lots of people to get these things across the finish line. So I'll make a plug for capital budget advocacy for our trust fund. Let's get rent stabilization across the finish line and continue to make sure that even though we have a deficit, we're not making cuts that hurt the people who need state resource the most. Let's protect vulnerable people. It costs more not to make investments in homelessness prevention and in addressing homelessness. It will cost us more, and it'll cost us more in bad ways in jails and in hospitals. It's not worth it. So thanks to the coalition for all the incredible advocacy that you do. And more than that, for everyone doing direct service work in our community. Thank you. That's the real work. I'm really in awe of people who show up every day and help make our communities better. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Alvarado. You're getting a lot of love in the chat, a lot of commitments to show up for rent stabilization this year from this crew of people. And so if it's okay, I'd love to jump to Rep. Peterson and then take questions for both of you at the end, if that works for your schedules. So really happy to introduce Rep. Strom Peterson from the 21st Legislative District. Rep. Peterson has been working really hard both last year and this year to help us make sure that local governments keep up their responsibility for taking care of people and keeping them housed. So thank you so much, Rep. Peterson, for being here and for all your work. I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Hallie. Thanks, everybody. Next year, when I do this, I'm going before Representative Alvarado. I'm not following that anymore. Just as a heads up for the schedulers. Thanks, Emily. And Rep. Alvarado, Emily. Just want to emphasize that I think rent stabilization is the number one priority, certainly of the Housing Committee. And I think the number one priority of the House Democratic Caucus. We're all meeting next week to go over priorities, but the work that Emily has done and that you all have done to make this a real possibility is just fantastic. So very much looking forward to doing that work. But as Emily said, there's a lot of other work that we need to do. And there's a lot of other policy work that we can do that is not going to cost us money. To kind of frame some of the directive that we've received from our leadership is really to look at, what policies with that kind of budget deficit, and sometimes they even throw out the number 12 billion just to really make everybody shudder. What are the policies we can do to combat kind of Project 2025 that we can implement that might not be expensive? And I was talking to my staff member yesterday, the fabulous Alma Weber, our HDC staffer on housing, and we were kind of going down the list. And I think, number one, I think is actually rent stabilization, because we know that there is just not going to be the federal support for people getting, whether it's going to be a reduction in housing vouchers or whether it's going to be kind of a work first priority for housing vouchers, whatever it's going to be, there's going to be less money for people to, less available, I think, vouchers. So stabilizing rent, I think, is a huge issue. The other issue is really looking at that section of the housing market that, kind of 30% and below AMI, and making sure that our cities are being good partners. And that's the bill that I'll be reintroducing this year. Should have a draft here in the next day or two. And once we get that a little more squared away, I'd certainly be sharing that with a lot of you. But that's a few years ago, and again, with the help of a lot of people in this coalition, we passed House Bill 1220, which really mandated that cities take into account the entire spectrum of housing. Back in the day when they did their comp plan updates, it was like, hey, the city of Edmonds, you're going to have 4,000 more people in the next 10 years. So you need housing for 4,000 more people. And that was kind of it. That was kind of as deep as the discussion got. So with House Bill 1220, it was really looking at, you need to make sure that you have policies in place to accept all the spectrum of housing. Of course, we had to make some concessions in that space. And Representative Macri and I, worked on that, and it's really good policy, but a couple of those concessions created a couple of loopholes that some cities have been exploiting. So the new bill, it was House Bill 2474 last year, which was kind of put together, I don't know, Emily, I was like halfway through a short session where a couple of things happened in a couple of cities that my head blew up and a couple of other people's heads blew up. So we decided to write a bill, and then realized that this could be really good policy. So it's, again, really going to make sure that we're holding cities accountable for allowing step housing. So emergency housing, permanent supportive housing, transitional, all the things that are such critical pieces of the entire kind of housing infrastructure, the entire housing model. So I'm excited about that. I kind of put that as kind of number 2 on the list of priorities coming out of the Housing Committee, because again, I think looking at what very well could happen from the federal side, and even if that wasn't the case, just what's happening day to day with all of the community members that you all interact with every day, and the struggle that's out there to get people housed and get people safe so they can have that element of safety and start putting their lives back together is critical. With the really, really dark cloud of Project 2025, I think 2025, this is even more critical. And we have a couple of other bills that we're working on. Representative Gregerson is working on a bill that I think we'll talk more about here in the next week or so. So that's really on that kind of what we can do on that kind of stabilization side, making sure that we can do some sort of stabilization in people's lives as they're struggling through whatever it is they're struggling through, a tough economy, a tough family situation, whatever it is. As you all know, the list is long, and the list is not because you're addicted to drugs, and the list is not because you have a mental health crisis. That is, you all know, a relatively small portion of the population that is really suffering out there on a daily basis. So part of that is going to be changing that, is always, as you know, changing that narrative. But so super excited about that, and then on the other, the other side of the ledger that we have done in the kind of on the supply side, we as in the Housing Committee and especially the House really led the way on creating a huge opportunity on the supply side. So for private developers to build housing, to build, you know, missing middle housing, to build other types of housing, permit reform. I don't know, a couple of years ago, I don't know, we passed like 10 bills that the builders liked, the realtors loved. Cities, maybe they didn't always like them, but we've really done the work on that side of the ledger, and we know that takes time, right? Trying to build housing, as Emily pointed out, especially if you're doing kind of big multifamily housing, you know, that's years in the making from concept to shovel in the ground. But we've done that work. We'll continue to do that work. There are things that we can still do to make sure that the building of housing is more affordable in Washington State, that whether it's finding new ways to free up land. I was on a national call a couple of weeks ago, thanks to Emily Alvarado, for putting me in contact with them, and talking to Senator Weiner from California and Congressman Gallardo from New York and others about opening up religious properties for housing. We passed a bill a couple of years ago, but similar to 1220, there were a couple of loopholes in it, and some cities just aren't embracing that opportunity as much as they should. So we're looking at opportunities to create more land. Land is the cost driver in housing, especially here in Western Washington. Mountains one side, water the other side, some water in the middle. Yeah, land is hard. So we're gonna, you know, working on issues around that, and working with, you know, this is the first year. And I was just reminded this morning on another call that the Washington Association of Counties, WASAC, whatever it's called, they actually have a housing policy list. They've never done that before. So there, you know, we have a lot in my district. We have a lot of unincorporated urban areas. If in my district and part of the 38th, if we incorporated, it would be like the 4th largest city in the state or some ridiculous thing. It's like a huge area of unincorporated Snohomish County. And we've done some work on the local level. I'm also on the county council to help improve the housing, but there are opportunities like that around the state, where very dense areas, urban growth areas that have services, that have transit, that have all the things, but they're just unincorporated. So we want to make sure that the work that we've done to kind of force cities to the table, we want to make sure that we're doing that to bring counties along as well. And they seem to be very willing to do that. And then I think kind of the other kind of part of this, when we're working with cities and counties, and they're often reluctant to make these changes, and they complain about cost drivers because they have to redo plans and they have to, et cetera, et cetera. You know, as Emily pointed out, our tax system is very regressive, certainly on the state level, and extremely limited on the local level. So counties have very few levers which they can use to raise revenues. Cities have a few more, but not that many more. And so we're going to look at raising the property tax cap from 1% to 3%, or 1% to something that's a little more based in the real world. And that will help our city and county partners, I think, be a little more open to accepting some of these changes that we're making, some of the things that we're going to make them do, that I understand it costs local governments some money to make this happen. So we want to make sure that they understand that we're doing that part as well, to give them a little more money so they can help invest in things that they also need to invest in. Again, you know, I'm on the Snohomish County Council. We have we're having a relatively austere budget, but we also need to make investments in human services, and make investments in housing, and make investments and try to make fewer investments in jails and prisons and police. And we do that by getting people off the street. So trying to figure out that message. If you invest over here, and I think Allison, we were on a call, I think it was yesterday, I don't know, all the days blur, and we're really excellent at kind of how do we frame that thing. It's like, if you're making the right investments, you don't have to make the wrong investments. But those conversations, for people that don't want to hear it, those conversations are really hard. But for people who kind of just go with, well, this is the way we've always done it. We arrest people and then they're not on the street anymore. Is we have to continue to prove that that is not the way to move forward. So those are a couple of the things that I'm excited to work on. Again, really broad policy ideas that aren't terribly expensive, but really get to the heart of some of the issues that we're facing. And then we'll rely on Emily's new position on the capital budget to make sure that we're funding the things that we need to fund. I was vice chair on capital budget for a while. It's great. I was there when we made like the first huge investment into the housing trust fund. So just, and to frame it for those of you who don't know, so I've been in the legislature, I don't know, like 10 years or something like that. The first year, the coalition, all of you people were asking for, boy, if we could get the housing trust fund, if we could get it to $100 million, that'd be great. And I think we did, like we got $102 million or something. There was a lot of celebration. What, last year, $450 million into the housing trust fund? And it's still not enough. Like that money is flying out the door. These projects are ready to be built. So, and again, it's because of leadership from many people like you on this call that are connecting those things. Yes, we have a funnel in which this money can go and it will be spent quickly. That was always one of the concerns. Well, if we flood the nonprofit world and affordable housing world with a bunch of money, do they really have enough projects to be built? The answer is yes. And they have probably twice as many as we've already funded. So good on you for making sure that you're finding all the people to help put those things together. And so I will help Emily in any way I can to support that. And then this will be my first year on the operating budget. And it's like, why have I done that this year? Somebody said, yeah, you're going from the ice cream budget to the broccoli budget. But I will be there to try to champion, the causes that we need on the operating side to make sure that we're funding the people that need to put these programs together and the people that are doing the day-to-day work. So it's going to be a hard year, but we'll get through. We have solid majorities, and I think a realization, and just enough people that were here from the last like horrific budget cuts of 2011 that realize, yeah, when you cut services to the most vulnerable in our communities, that's not the way to do it. They don't have lobbyists. But it took us 10 years to almost get back to even after those cuts in kind of 2011. So I think there's a real realization of that, to make sure that our budget writers are Nicole Macri and Mia Gregerson and Tim Ormsby, and they get it. So
Yeah.
tough decisions will be made, but always with the vision of we have to do whatever we can to protect the folks and the families that you all are working with on a day-to-day basis. So that's it for me. Again, next year, I don't follow Alvarado.
Thank you so much, Rep. Peterson. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your excellent work. We have just a couple minutes for questions. If folks have questions for Rep. Peterson or Rep. Alvarado, please feel free to raise a hand or hop in the chat and I can read questions out loud. Yeah, Kat, go ahead.
Thank you so much for both of your work, Reps Peterson and Alvarado. I am curious if there's any appetite for a social housing model in different corners of the state beyond Seattle.
I think so. I'll share this. Coming to the legislature, I was really impressed to see how lawmakers from across the state have very good relationships and very positive experiences with their housing authorities. smaller, larger across the state. And I think that, you know, a broad vision of what social housing is, where it's mixed income housing in public ownership. When you talk about it that way, I feel like that's a message that does resonate. And people see that with what's happening already with their local housing authorities across the state. So building on the I think what is challenging right now, honestly, given some of the budget concerns, is imagining new models at the state level. But I think resourcing partners in our community, including public housing authorities, to be more creative and expansive and do more is something that there's certainly support for. You saw a bill last session, I think it was, that allowed housing authorities to have more flexibility in the incomes that they serve when they're using private financing to purchase buildings and to purchase land. I think that's a foot in the door to a broader social housing model, quite frankly. I think there's broad recognition that middle income households are struggling to be served by the market. And that too is what a social housing model intends to respond to. I think also there's a lot of visibility right now in the legislature into how it's challenging and hard to operate affordable housing, that even our existing model needs more operating and services resources so that it can be stable. So I think there are places to build on where there's enthusiasm, which is housing people of all incomes and doing more better. But I think it would be hard to talk about anything that is brand new and requires new state infrastructure from a like organizational infrastructure if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
One thing that I'm personally excited for is last session, I know I was a big advocate to have state housing resources for the first time be sent to the Washington State Housing Finance Commission for acquisition lending. And I think, you know, in challenging times like now, it's a great time to lock down land, take it off the speculative real estate market and preserve it for an opportunity for affordable housing, mixed income housing for generations to come. I know I'll continue to advocate for acquisition resources so we can do that. And I think that long term, there's a lot of ways to make sure that housing that we build becomes mixed income and meets the goals of labor and environmental equity as well.
Thank you, Rep. Alvarado. I want to address one question that's in the chat, and then unfortunately, I see there are other questions coming in, but we do have to move on to our next section after this. But there's a question from Angie. Why aren't we pushing for a state income tax, or are we? How can I help? And I might broaden this not only to an income tax, but to like, you know, are there opportunities for progressive taxes or progressive revenue in general this year?
Yeah, I mean, a state income tax, I mean, right now it's unconstitutional. So it's virtually impossible for us to do something legislatively. It would really have to be a groundswell. And as much as I do not like governing by initiative, it would have to be an initiative of the people to really radically change the tax structure. Broader than that, though, as Emily pointed out, we are 49th in regressive taxation. We used to be 50th. So we went up a little bit because of the capital gains tax that voters overwhelmingly supported in this last election. So there is more consideration of progressive taxation policies that don't fit into an income tax model, but do fit into taxation on other, you know, there's talk around a wealth tax, there's talk around expanding the, a graduated real estate excise tax. So, real estate excise tax on, multi-cajillion dollar homes pay a slightly higher rate. So more money goes into the system. So there is a lot of discussion this year on that revenue side.
One thing I would add on revenue is that because our budget hole is so big, I believe we're going to need sources that can be immediately used as we also look towards generating new revenue options that might take longer to implement. When you create a new tax, it sometimes takes longer to put into play. So looking at a range of revenue options with an emphasis on progressive revenue that can help meet our budget challenges might take looking at a few options.
Thank you so much, both of you. Really appreciate you joining us today, Rep. Alvarado and Rep. Peterson. And you can count on this crew to show up and help support the bills that you all are championing. So thank you so much. You're welcome to stick around. You're welcome
Thank
to
you,
answer.
Hallie.
Yeah,
I do
welcome.
want, can I say one thing, which is
Sure.
Allison put a question in the chat, which said, what does showing up look like? Can you just email once and be done? I just want to say that the more you contact us, the better. For those of us who are already supportive, we use that groundswell as proof that these issues are priorities. For those who are not focused on these issues, it's really hard to tune out when your constituents are constantly contacting you about something. Also remember that, the mass emails really do make a difference to show volume and momentum. So do personal stories that give us something to carry forward and to share a human face and lens to. The coalition stays plugged in throughout the session, so continue to be active with the coalition. Shout out for Michelle at the Housing Alliance, who tracks and watches what's happening on a daily basis in the legislature more than almost anyone. So their action alerts are really up to date and keep you involved. Thanks again for everything.
Thank you
Yep.
all.
Thank you,
Really
everybody.
appreciate you joining us. And with that awesome segue from Rep. Alvarado, I am very pleased to introduce Michelle Thomas from the Housing Alliance. And Michelle, I think you should be able to share your screen if you need. So take it away.
I'm going to get the slides up right now. Thank you so much. And thanks, Rep. Peterson and Rep. Alvarado, so much for your work. We are so lucky to have such incredible leaders like you. And it makes passing really hard policy possible. We would not be able to do it without your leadership. So thank you for all you do. And I think it's obvious to everybody, but they work so hard. And it's going to be a long, hard session. So all the love we can give them is appropriate and I would say much needed. All right, so anyhow, I'm Michelle from the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really excited to be here today with you all. Thank you so much for Sketch for your work and for your advocacy. So I am going to give you a little bit more detail on the what to expect in 2025 with the legislature. So a little bit of a preview. And then I'm going to highlight a couple of key issues that we're working on, including rent stabilization and the advocacy needed for that. And I always forget how to start the slides. How do you do that?
There's like
there's
a little button at the bottom, like next to your Zoom, like zoom in and zoom out, that sort of looks like a projector screen. That's what I use.
Okay.
Like,
Can you all see the slides though right now?
Yeah, we can see it. It's a little small, but it works.
Yeah, I am just being super dumb right now.
That's
Michelle,
okay.
go to
It's fine how it is.
Michelle, go to the right bottom or the right bottom, and you see go over one. There you are.
I see it. Oh my God. Thank you, Hallie and Taylor. All right. We're amongst friends, so don't hold that against me, please. Anyhow, so you know, obviously a big election just happened nationally and in the state. And there's some really important takeaways from it that I just wanted to highlight. First of all, every lawmaker who voted yes on rent stabilization last session was reelected, and oftentimes with a better margin than what they received in prior years. As Rep. Alvarado pointed out, rent stabilization was passed over from the House over to the Senate, died in the Senate. But the one thing, and I'll show you the Ways and Means, the new Ways and Means Committee for 2025, there's a lot of changes in the Senate, including a much better Ways and Means Committee. And as you probably already know, but it's important to point out, the House and the Senate will continue to be in control of Democrats. The Senate Democrats picked up one additional member, Adrian Cortez from the 18th Legislative District, and we're excited to welcome him into the legislature. The House also picked up at least one seat in the 26th. And I point this out because who controls each chamber is extremely consequential. The controlling party decides the committee makeup, so which committees exist, literally, what their jurisdiction is, and who's on them, and then which bills get a vote on the floor, and then the committee chairs decide which bills get a hearing and a vote in committee. And committee chairs are always reflect the majority of that chamber. So Democrats are in control of all the committees and in control of the floor, and obviously in control of the higher offices, including the governor and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general. So, whoops, this kind of is repetitive. Sorry about that. But there's one thing that's really important about this session which is going to impact us greatly, especially at the beginning, is that there's a lot of change. The change, like I already just said, but also significantly, Senator Peterson, Jamie Peterson from the 43rd Legislative District is the new head of the Senate majority. He's the new majority leader because Senator Andy Billig from Spokane resigned, and Senator Peterson was elected by his peers to lead the chamber. The leader of the majority leader has a lot of power. And so your voices, especially those of you who are based in the 43rd, are going to be absolutely critical to communicate with him constantly through the legislative session and demand that things like rent control, rent stabilization pass the legislature, and that progressive revenue be passed, and that we have budgets that do not cut key human services. There's also just a lot of appointments, like Rep. Alvarado mentioned. There's a lot of new staff. This is the thing that's not really able to be seen by folks who don't spend a lot of time in Olympia, but there's a lot of new staff, a lot of staff who changed roles. And so all of this together just creates, honestly, a lot of chaos, particularly at the beginning of the session. So I predict that the legislature will take several weeks to sort of get their feet underneath them, get everything moving smoothly. And then hopefully after the first month, things will get going in a way that is a little bit more like normal, but it is going to be quite chaotic at the beginning. As I think Rep. Alvarado or Allison mentioned, 2025 is the beginning of a new biennium, and so it's going to be a long session. The state legislature is modeled after the budget process. It's their number one duty. It's technically the only thing they have to do. They don't have to pass any of their bills, but their duty is to pass a state budget, and we have a 2-year budget in Washington. So we have a biennial budget and we have biennial legislative sessions. So odd years are always the beginning of the budget years, the budget process rather. And so it's a long session. We have 105 days. Long sessions are good, even though they're grueling and tired and oh my God, April 25th, are you serious? But they're good because we have more time. It gives us more time between a hearing, for example, and the cutoff in a committee. It gives us more time when a bill is passed to the next step to get it through the process. So more time is good, especially since there's so many new people and there's going to be a lot of chaos at the beginning. And especially since we have the huge gorilla in the room, which is the budgets. As mentioned already, there is a really significant budget deficit. The 10 to $12 billion projection that everybody keeps saying, I want to make clear, is over 4 years. It's not over 2 years. However, there is a requirement that the 2-year budget that lawmakers are going to write starting in 2025 balances out over 4 years. So the 4-year projection is important because over 4 years, the budget has to either cut enough to account for the $10 to $12 billion deficit, or we have to have a revenue that fills that gap so that they don't have to do any cuts. Oh, right. Let me get back here. Okay, cool. So the new committees are all out, including the new jurisdictions and the new leadership and the new members. I'm just including a couple here that are most relevant to housing and homelessness. So the House Housing Committee, obviously, we heard already from Rep. Peterson, who is the chair. He was already chair, so he remains the chair. So that's good because there's continuity there. And also he's amazing and doesn't let bad bills through. And there's 2 new vice chairs. Rep. Alvarado was a vice chair last year. Vice chairmanships are typically almost always given to brand new lawmakers. It's an opportunity for training. So we're really excited that Representative-elect Hill from the 3rd Legislative District is a new vice chair. She is amazing. She's from Spokane. Her entire campaign was focused on equity and rent stabilization. And then there's also Rep-elect Addison Richards from the 26th Legislative District. Hallie, do you want to, I see you just put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is super helpful to have all of this laid out, and we can definitely share these slides with people.
Yeah.
I just wanted to flag we're running a little bit behind schedule.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit about sort of the document recording fees and
Yeah.
why that's important? And we can for sure share these slides out. This is a lot of excellent information to share with folks.
Yep. So just on the screen right now is that Housing Alliance's full legislative priorities. Really quick, and I'll put this in the chat when we're done. There is a lot of advocacy needed to get rent stabilization over the finish line. And so I will put the opportunities, including a new action alert just today. That's really critical because Monday is the House Democratic Advance, and they're going to be making their priorities. Yes, here we are. So the document recording fees, I think you all know, are the primary way we fund homeless services in Washington. I won't go into the nitty-gritty about how they're function, but they are absolutely critical. For similar reasons that we have a state budget deficit in the operating budget in particular, we have also a shortfall of the revenue needed to sustain current levels of services for homelessness prevention. That deficit or shortfall is massive. As you can see on your screen, it's $253 million. So I know many of you have joined us in Skitch in advocacy over the last 2 years to prevent to address the shortfall and prevent cuts. And we have together been successful, but you may remember that it was dramatically lower, and those occurred during times when there wasn't budget deficits. So having such a massive shortfall at a time when the legislature is looking at cuts is really devastating. And again, this is also not asking for increases in the level of services. It is asking for maintaining the status quo. The Department of Commerce put forward a full $400 million budget ask. We'll see Governor Inslee's budget, I think, next week. Whether or not the governor puts any money towards homeless services to fill the shortfall remains to be seen. The governor's budget, though, is really just a starting point, especially since he's an outgoing governor. And the legislature oftentimes takes that, looks at it carefully, but then they really make their own budgets. So these cuts will affect every single homeless service you can think of that has any state funding in it. You see the list in front of you of the state agencies, the state type of grants that are impacted. Plus there's the local document recording fee revenue as well that's impacted. This ask of $253 million includes a small appropriation to help local governments in their shortfall, but it doesn't fully backfill the local government's portion of the document recording fees, unfortunately. Over the last 2 years, we were able to also backfill the local government portion, but because the shortfall is so large this year, I think the Department of Commerce made an appropriate decision to just put forward a request to maintain mostly the state level cuts level of funding. So the big point here, and you can see it does include a small inflationary increase, which is important. It also includes the ability to continue to provide OMS, operations and maintenance support, for permanent supportive housing. So I just want to say really clear, are going to need every single one of you helping us to make sure that this backfill is fully funded. And it's going to be a huge effort. And we need your support. The first budget hearings are almost always on the first day of the legislative session, and it's a budget hearing on the governor's budget. Sometimes they're the second day. So we'll see when we get the committee schedules, but that will be an opportunity for people who work in homeless services and people who have been homeless themselves and who have received these services to help come with us and testify on the importance of filling this gap. You can contact me directly to express interest in joining our efforts to prevent to make sure the gap is fully funded and to testify. Organizations are needed. And like I said, people who have been impacted by homelessness and who have received these services are particularly valuable. So I can leave it there. I was going to talk about capital funding for affordable homes, but Rep. Alvarado overviewed that. The only quick comment I want to say is that we're looking for a pretty big request. The capital budget isn't as impacted by the state deficits as the operating budget. And we're asking for a lot of things in the capital budget, not just funding for new homes. We're looking for funding to also stabilize the current affordable housing that's out there. And we will also be working on a bill to create a permanent fund source for capital investments in affordable homes. Representative Berg will continue to be the champion on that. So more details will come out soon about that. Okay, I'll stop now.
Thank you so much, Michelle. For those who haven't met Michelle before, she is a fabulous advocate, super, super knowledgeable, and we will be sure to share those slides out with folks. Before we kick it over to Molly at Poverty Action, just want to put sort of a high-level summary of like something Michelle said in a meeting the other day about those document recording fee shortfall, is that if we don't backfill those, shelters will close. Period. And that is an unacceptable outcome when we need so much more. So that's a really, really high priority for us, as well as the Housing Alliance. And you can expect to hear much, much more from both of us about that issue. Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to hand it next to Molly Gallagher over at Poverty Action. Molly, take it away.
Hi, yeah. Hallie, am I running the slides or do you have them?
I can grab them. Give me just a second.
That would be great. Yeah, so hi, I'm Molly Gallagher with the Statewide Poverty Action Network. We advocate in the state legislature for poverty reduction policy, working with our statewide community to ensure that the voices of those impacted by policy are centered in the decisions that impact their lives. As we all know, it is, when you're hiking the trail, you know a lot more about the conditions than the person who designed it. And you have the best input on where the obstacles are that need to be cleared out of the way, where the bridges bridges to stability are washed out, and how to where the most important improvements are needed, to ensure that everyone has a clear and accessible pathway out of poverty. So ensuring that the voices of those who are impacted by policy, are centered at the decisions about how to create it are the most vital. What we're hearing from our statewide community, are the priorities that, the policies that we're prioritizing this legislative session. So if we go to the next slide, we are starting with one of our state's main pathways out of poverty, which is temporary assistance for needy families, also known as TANF. What we hear from our communities around the state is that during before the recession in 2011 and during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a major a bridge to stability in broad hardship exemptions for time limits. So if you didn't know, TANF has a federal 60-month time limit. So regardless of need, if you reach a cumulative 60 months on the program, you get kicked off unless you meet a set of very narrow exemptions that are really cumbersome to access. Previously in our state, most recently during the COVID-19 pandemic, we put in a broad exemption to those time limits for hardship. And what we saw is that people were able to access benefits that they needed when they needed them, regardless of arbitrary time limits. This disproportionately benefited families of color who are disproportionately removed from the caseload due to time limits. This makes sense. You know, the process of accessing narrow exemptions is a number of institutional hurdles. If you give institutional hurdles, you create opportunities for institutional racism. So the more institutional hurdles, the more institutional racism, the more disproportionately we see families of color disproportionately removed due to their share of the caseload. In a time when we are facing a massive budget shortfall, it is a great time to think about ways that we can streamline the efficiency of our benefits programs. One way to do that would be to remove a institutional hurdle in these narrow hardship exemptions that would streamline access and streamline things on the back end, reducing administrative costs for administering programs that are lifeline support for families. It seems like a real no-brainer. We can make our temporary assistance for needy families more racially equitable, easier to access, more effective at providing people with the help that they need when they need it, all while reducing the workload for those who administer our state's vital benefits. Additionally, another thing that we know about TANF is that the cash grant amount does not increase without an action of the legislature, which means that every year the cash grant decreases in value unless the legislature acts to increase the cash grant, which means that people receive less for no reason. We think that doesn't make any sense as well, and would like to see the TANF cash grant tied to something that automatically increases with inflation and rising costs of living. TANF is designed to mitigate the effects of deep poverty, which is defined by living at 50% or lower of the federal poverty level, which we know is an insufficient measure of what it actually costs to meet your most basic needs. We also know that the current TANF cash grant does not bring families to that 50% FPL threshold, which means that the program that exists to mitigate the effects of deep poverty doesn't even bring you to the level of deep poverty, which feels like it doesn't make any sense. If we tied the TANF cash grant to just 16% of the needs standard, we would, for all family sizes, reach at least that 50% benchmark, allowing families to access more resources to meet their most basic needs. So For temporary assistance for needy families, we want to build a more effective bridge to stability by passing broad hardship exemptions for time limits that would allow families to access help when they need it without navigating a complicated institutional process, and tying the cash grant to 16% of the need standards, that it automatically keeps up with inflation and rising costs and brings families to at least the level that TANF is supposed to mitigate the effects of being below income-wise. I just want to shout out that Rep. Peterson, who was here earlier, has been a steadfast champion for TANF time limit exemptions and a champion for families living in deep poverty. Want to give a huge shout out for the years of work that he put into getting this policy advanced. And we're hoping to get it across the finish line this year to mitigate the effects of benefits cliffs for families living in deep poverty in our state. And then if we go on to the next slide, the Working Families Tax Credit is another direct cash assistance program that provides lifeline support to families living on low and moderate incomes in Washington. Unfortunately, there's another benefits cliff in this program, which is that young people without children are ineligible for the tax credit. So the tax credit is currently available to childless adults between 25 and 65, leaving out a huge chunk of the population who are working to reach stability. Many people in the 18 to 25 age range are attending college, leaving their family homes, transitioning out of the foster care system and trying to stand on their own 2 feet for the first time. And access to lifeline assistance from the Working Families Tax Credit could be huge for establishing stability as they leave, being a dependent and start finding independence on their own. And without having children, you cannot access the Working Families Tax Credit, which feels like a major shortcoming. So this session, we are hoping to expand eligibility to include this vulnerable population of 18 to 25-year-olds. As an 18 to 25-year-old myself, I remember very vividly the feeling of graduating college and feeling just very on my own in a new city, and knowing that as I file my taxes, I could get some money back in my pockets would have been huge to feel independent and stable as I'm entering the workforce and trying to figure out adulthood for the first time. Similarly, we hear from our community around the state that the accessing benefits programs, knowing what you're eligible for and navigating the processes of applying for benefits from different agencies is really confusing. You can apply for the Working Families Tax Credit and not know that you are also eligible for SNAP or for TANF, for example, because they are administered by different agencies and require different applications to access. We are working on the administrative side to facilitate data sharing between agencies to allow to move towards categorical eligibility, so that when you apply for the Working Families Tax Credit and that you're also eligible for SNAP, you receive both at the same time without having to navigate additional administrative processes. For people working hard to make ends meet, applying for social safety net programs can be an additional full-time job, which makes it even harder to access programs that you're eligible for and makes it not worth your time and effort. So we're working to streamline that on the back end. Similarly, as the legislative champions mentioned earlier, during a budget shortfall, it is really awesome to find free ways to further advocacy on our state social safety net. Passing a data sharing bill is free, but would allow us to move towards streamlining access and eligibility that would allow people to access benefits that already exist, but they don't know that they're eligible for or don't have the time to navigate the process of applying for and receiving. So always really exciting to have a free bill on the list for an anti-poverty organization. Me and the fiscal committees are like this. So getting to not go through that is very exciting. And streamlining administrative processes allows for greater efficiency and more wiggle room to expand access in the future. So in summary, for our direct cash programs, we're really excited to advocate for streamlining access and eligibility for TANF and the Working Families Tax Credit, extending access to lifeline support to families who need it when they need it, as well as for single young adults like myself, only a little bit selfishly. Anyways, on to the next slide. It is not enough, we know, to get money in people's pockets. We also need to protect folks from predatory lending practices with strong consumer protections, making sure that folks are not on the receiving end of undue harm from debt collectors. What is coming up this year is that in 2021, we passed a bill that protects $2,000 in people's bank accounts from garnishment, which is like a basic amount to pay for rent and essentials as you face, and you can pay down your debt, but you also need to have a basic amount to live. So when you're facing garnishment, this legislation protects a basic amount, and then $1,000 of that is required to be self-executing, meaning that it can't be taken in the first place. This is a little bit in the weeds. So it's like $1,000 is automatically protection, and then if an additional $1,000 is garnished, you have to navigate a legal procedure to basically make the collectors give it back to you. What we have seen and the data shows is that people don't realize that that last $1,000 is protected, and they don't know how to navigate the legal process for getting it back. Even if they do know how to navigate that process, it is time-consuming, difficult, and inconvenient. For folks who are working hard to make ends meet, it may not be worth their time and effort to go chase down the money that was illegally garnished from them. So functionally, that we only protect $1,000, which is self-executing. Unfortunately, even that self-executing protection of $1,000 is set to sunset in 2025, which is unacceptable. People should have a basic amount protected from garnishment to meet their most basic needs for survival. So as we enter this legislative session, we would like to increase the amount protected from garnishment to keep up with rising costs to $3,000 in people's bank accounts, and make all of that $3,000 self-executing, so that, if we're going to protect a basic amount in people's bank accounts, we should just protect it and not allow that money to be garnished in the first place. It's really inconvenient and unlikely that folks will chase down money illegally garnished by collectors when they're already facing a lot of pressure to pay down their debt. They're scared of the collectors, so they don't want to initiate that complicated legal procedure. If we're going to protect money in people's bank accounts, we should just make that self-executing so that we don't have to initiate complicated legal procedures for folks who are struggling already. So this is just kind of a brief summary of the top line of Poverty Action's policy agenda, which will be up on our website in full in the coming weeks ahead of the legislative session. But overall, our focus is clearing the pathway out of poverty by listening to the folks who are walking it, to identify where the obstacles to access are, rebuilding bridges to security and stability, and making sure that folks' hard-earned cash is not removed from their pockets as they are working hard to meet their most basic needs. Available for any questions, I'll drop my email in the chat, and also a link to sign up for Poverty Action's email newsletters to stay updated as we approach session. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Molly. And Michelle, if you haven't done it already, if you could share an opportunity to sign up for the Housing Alliance's email as well. That's always a great way to stay in touch and get action alerts from all these fabulous partner agencies. So next up, we have Anthony Blankenship from Civil Survival. They do a lot of voting rights work, which of course at the Coalition, we are also very passionate about. So Anthony, take it away.
Yes, thank you all so much for having me, and apologies, I don't have a fancy presentation to give y'all today, but I did share some one-pagers with Haley, and hopefully we can share those out, as well as we start to shore up some of our bill priorities, we will let our community know. So thank you all so much for having me. As Haley said, we've been working with the Coalition on Homelessness for quite a few years now. I want to say about 4 or 5, working on voting issues. And in a lot of the work that I work on is at the intersection of criminal legal reform and different issues. And so voting, reentry, and sentencing and poverty issues. And so it kind of covers it all when you've been impacted by the criminal legal system. So thank you again for having me. I want to talk about first jail voting. This is a bill that we've been working on for 2 years now. What this bill would do is it would require all counties and or all county jails in jails in Washington State to have some sort of jail voting plan that they would then submit to the Secretary of State's office. And what we found is that there are only a couple counties that actually, or county jails that actually do jail voting. And then there's even less city jails that do jail voting. And so really trying to work on, for the last 2 years, work on building their capacity without any legislation. But what is become apparent is there needs to be some sort of oversight and at least some jail-like voting minimum standards. And so that's what this bill would do, is create, is give guidance on what minimum standards would be. Such as, making sure people know that, an election is coming up, how to access a registration form to change their address or to register for the first time, making sure that they have access to voting resources. And then, there are some states that or some counties that have gone above and beyond that, in bringing in, people to from the community to register voters. What we've seen in some counties, they've done some very amazing things, in which we're really appreciative of, and we hope that we can make this something that is throughout the state. Another bill that we're working on is Act for Civic Engagement, and this would allow people in prison to be able to get civically engaged while they are attempting to. Sometimes there's barriers such as allowing people to testify from different facilities, allowing people to congregate and talk about public policy and help develop public policy, being able to come into virtual meetings, and being able to share, like such as in this space, getting permission to be able to come into these types of spaces as a currently incarcerated person and share their priorities. Another one that we're working on is ending poverty fees in the criminal courts. And so what we've seen is poverty fees such as legal financial obligations really do create a lot of harm. Our organization works with people who have legal financial obligations to help them get that reduced or eliminated. But there's definitely some that are still unable to collect, or we're still unable to remove, and so they go to collections, where they will receive very high interest rates on these. Uh, and so we're still building out what this looks like, but any kind of discretionary things, what we don't want to do is remove it from, like, if I owed Jody, money for, taking something from her, we're not trying to remove that. But let's say I, take something from Target, for instance, and then they, there's fees associated with that. And so, not necessarily trying to hurt individuals or corporations, they just get the right stuff off. Whereas individuals, it's really harder to recuperate. And so that is a bill that we've been working on. And then another new one that that we're working on, I think that really at the intersection of criminality and poverty, is around background checks for employment. We passed state legislation a few years ago, or a decade ago now, that bans the box for, like, when you go to apply for a job. But what we found is that even with that, people are still being discriminated, and so they'll just give you they'll just, at when you're going to interview, they'll hand you something and say, hey, fill this out. And so if you're like, oh, I don't have anything, it's just much easier to see who, but right, even before you interview, like, do an interview, it's easier to see who and who has not actually have a adverse background. And so what we're trying to do is push that until after you receive a conditional offer of employment, where you would then do a background check on someone. And then, very similar to what's in Seattle, which lawmakers really just don't like to connect anything Seattle related to state, but I'm doing it here just because it makes it easy to kind of explain, is that then they would have to have a legitimate business reason why they would not hire someone. And so what we don't want is, like, if you are, working with a vulnerable population and then you've harmed a vulnerable population, that would, that we want that conditional offer of employment there, and you can be able to say, hey, sorry, you've done this thing. But what we don't want is, like, someone doing anything and then going to pack boxes at Amazon and not being able to get a job, right? And so there's definitely something to be said for the legitimate business reason part of this bill, which we think is hopefully really strong. We are considering doing a private right of action, and so what we found in Seattle, which does not do the conditional offer of employment, it is before that still, that it's really hard to identify if they're discriminating based off of your background or not. And so doing it after the conditional offer of employment, where then you can say, hey, you can make your case. If they don't hire you, you have some sort of out if it was done in a way that was not in line with state policy. And so we're really excited about this background bill. We think that hopefully we can get people working, reduce some of the stigma, because I do think a lot of people who've been formerly incarcerated are just waiting for an opportunity to have a job, or they're oftentimes making very low wages, yet they have wonderful skills, and so we want them to be able to have a living wage. And so yeah. Sorry, I am running through these super fast. Lastly, I wanted to talk about another bill that we're doing around prison reform. And so we have been working on reforming solitary confinement and trying to end it in Washington State. And so we're taking a stepped approach. We would really like to end it in all jails, prisons, and the federal detention center, which is wild that the federal detention center for, people who are immigrants have, solitary confinement. It just baffles me because they have not committed a crime yet. But we're trying to take a step approach. And so we're focusing on prisons this time, and we're just focusing on trying to work on whenever you have an infraction, which is like you do something that is against policy, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these policies, you could potentially go to solitary confinement. And it could be for very seemingly innocuous things. Somebody wrote a op-ed in the Seattle Times, and then they went in and tried to, and they end up putting this person in solitary confinement. And then they let him out with no infraction. And so we want to be able to like stop things like that from happening. Only when there's like an assault or attempted assault or arson or attempted arson or escape or, things that are, more considered violent infractions. Those would constitute someone going to solitary. And this is something that's very much a concession for us of trying to take a step approach, because we want to end it completely. So what we're trying to do is then narrow that approach, and then also change the burden of proof for infractions. And so right now it's some evidence. And so Jody can be like, Anthony did this, and as a guard or someone who's incarcerated, they're just going to automatically, give you an infraction. That's all it's going to take. And so by increasing that burden of proof to preponderance of evidence, it's more in line with our, state laws around criminality. And so it would be like Jody would then say, here goes, proof that he did something. And then here goes some other evidence that, corroborative stories from other people that said Anthony did something. And so those are some of the bills that we are working on. Like I said, we're still finalizing that. I know that there's some bills that we're hoping that gets dropped, and that we will be, supporting things like being able to take your if you have an adverse driving history due to alcohol, like a DUI, being able to take that off your record if you have been, if you haven't done anything driving related in like 10 years, we would love to have something like that, pass, so people can go up to Canada and see Taylor Swift. But that seems to be the biggest reason why this would be introduced. So we're trying to figure out, but it would help a lot of people, as you all know, working with people who are unhoused. A lot of times they get into the poverty cycle. Being able to, or not being able to drive, can be very much connected to not being able to get employment or doing things like that. And so thank you all so much. I see my name, so I think Haley is being like, wrap it up, let's go to the next one. Alice and Jody, thank you all so much for allowing me to speak, and yeah, I appreciate everyone.
Anthony, thank you so much. We learned so much from you personally, from your colleagues at Civil Survival, and from the partnership, about being able not only to just acknowledge that not having a home is so often connected to having a criminal record, whether or not what you got that criminal record for has anything substantive to do with your contributions to our community, and we really appreciate the partnership. we understand. Also, I'm on for like 3 minutes to talk about something that we also don't have a full bill or one pager about yet. So we totally understand you're working on things that haven't yet been introduced, and we'll have you back. So it's an open door, you know that, Anthony. We thank you so much for the thoughtfulness, the partnership, and for also, giving us the insight. I know, because I'm on your survivors of solitary list, it must be profoundly difficult to think about the compromises necessary to advance your long-term policy vision and vision for humanity, while understanding that you need a stepped approach sometimes to be able to keep moving forward. And I think that's really, that's a learning that we all have to grapple with in our own issue areas in our own time. It would be great if we could do things in one fell swoop, but that's almost never the case. So thank you for giving us that bit of insight also into what policy advocacy looks like and feels like. And actually, what I'm going to talk about is, it's not exactly secret, but it is a bill that is being developed right now that we're not really ready to share publicly yet, but we want you all, our members and allies and partners, to know about. Because it's also part of taking a somewhat more strategic and therefore cautious approach to advance our ultimate goals. And that has to do with responding to the fact that we have thousands of people who are outside, largely in public spaces, in all our communities, all across this region and all across the state, and frankly, all across the country. And yet we are divided. We're divided as a people about how we respond to that fact that there are people who are in public spaces after our shelters are full, when we know that there aren't enough emergency or long-term better places for people to live. I think everyone here understands folks don't choose to experience homelessness, but we also know that, particularly with the Supreme Court decision this summer overturning the Martin versus Boise precedent, we know that local jurisdictions are passing more laws and enforcing their existing laws to punish, fine, arrest, and jail people without homes for being homeless in public. While we would love to be able to take a step of moving forward legislation that says you can't do that, that's not really how it works when the Supreme Court has issued a decision like the one they did in the Grants Pass versus Gloria Johnson case. So we've been working with our partners at the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, Columbia Legal Services, the American Civil Liberties Union, some of the folks on this call here, and several state lawmakers to try to think about a smart approach that is a step in the right direction towards saying, if a local jurisdiction is going to make laws that affect whether or not people can sit, lie down, sleep, eat, or rest in a place that is shared public space, this is what it has to look like. It has to be objectively reasonable. That is a portion, along with the legislation that Strom Peterson talked about bringing back, requiring that local jurisdictions have to not only plan for, but permit shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, and all the kinds of housing that communities need. That is a piece of legislation that goes along with Senator-elect Jessica Bateman's Housing Accountability Act to ensure that we have more housing in all jurisdictions. And it is we think, a reasonable, protective, phased approach, just like what Anthony shared with us about solitary confinement. So we have put a lot of work into this, a lot of thought, and we are going to be sharing the details with you before the legislative session starts in January. The one other short thing I'll say before we switch to Hallie and Danielle, who've got a great, easy advocacy training for you and some really important public community announcements, is all this has been focused on the state legislative session. It starts January 13th. We've got 105 days to get an awful lot of important work done. But guess what? Things don't stop at the local level when the state legislature is in session. And we know, and many of you who do work in Seattle know, that there are members of the Seattle City Council who are planning to introduce legislation to roll back a variety of tenant protections in the city of Seattle. There are a lot of different pieces of this. We're still gathering information and having important conversations, but just be aware that that is happening, and we will be calling on you to speak up and to show up at the local level as well as at the state level. And with that, I see there's great stuff in the chat. There's stuff happening in Burien, good and bad. There's stuff happening in Federal Way and in many other communities. So you keep us informed, we'll keep you informed, and take it away, Hallie, to give people the easy steps for taking action. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. And if you forget everything else that has happened today, remember to sign up for our email list, because we will email you everything you need to know, including all the stuff that I'm about to talk about. And I'm going to share some easy ways that folks can speak up during the legislative session. A lot of it might sound familiar if you've been engaged in city or county advocacy with us, but there are some things that are sort of a special to the state. And I have been like trimming down this slideshow dramatically throughout this meeting because we don't have a lot of time. And so we're going to have more opportunities to learn throughout the legislative session. I'm going to be hosting some advocacy power half hours as we go through the session. So stay tuned for that. Okay, one really important thing for all levels of advocacy is to know who represents you. This is also true at the state level. So if I could have one of my colleagues drop the link for folks to find their district. Each of you lives in a district, and each district has 2 representatives and 1 senator who represents you. It's really important to know who those people are, so that you can contact them and say, hello, I live in your district. And that really cues them in to pay attention, because you are their constituent and you can either rehire them for their job or excuse them from their position in office. So elected officials pay a lot of attention to their constituents when they reach out. I wrote you a poem. Allison loves poems, so I wrote a poem for you. I think this is a haiku. Somebody can check me on that. This goes back to what Rep. Alvarado was talking about, that you need to contact people multiple times throughout the session. So contact your reps again. You won't annoy them, I swear. They need to hear you. If those syllables aren't right, I'm sorry, but I think I got it okay. This is really important to contact all of your representatives, whether they are supportive of the thing that you are supportive of or not. We will also call on you multiple times throughout the session to take action on the same thing over and over and over again, because bills move through different bodies of people as they go through the legislature. Michelle was talking a lot about different committees. So if you're like, I've already taken action on this thing, I don't want to annoy these people, don't worry about it, because they need to hear from you multiple times. So please do not worry about annoying your elected officials. Just be, civil in your comments, but do contact them multiple times. Okay, there's a lot of different ways to speak up during the legislative session. And again, if you forget all of this, just sign up for our email list, because we will let you know how and when to do it. But just to go through some options, one of them that's special to the legislature, this isn't an option at like city or county, is to sign in pro or con. This is the fastest way to take action. It takes like a minute or less. And all it does is it puts your name on a public list of people that either support or oppose a certain bill. That can be really helpful for showing like massive support or massive opposition to a bill. Oops, I don't think we need this poll right now. I think we'll do this later. Yeah. Thank you. And this, the only other note on this one for signing in pro or con is just make sure to use your personal email address unless you are authorized to represent your organization. Another option is you can call your lawmakers. If you go to that link that we put in the chat to find your lawmakers, you can find their website, you can sign up for their mailing lists, you can find phone numbers for them, but probably the easiest way to call the legislature is to call the legislative hotline. So there's one number you can call to comment on any bill, any budget item, anything. And I'll have one of my colleagues drop that phone number in the chat for me, please. So all that you need is you need your name and your address so that they can help route you to the right people. And then you'll leave a message and they will send the message on to your elected representatives. This is a super cool thing. We don't have this at the city or the county. So that is an awesome, awesome resource. Probably the most common thing is that you can email your legislators. We make this super easy, as you'll all see in a moment. And one tip for these is if you have, more closer to the 5 minutes time frame, you can personalize that first sentence or two. Because both, as our Alvarado said, like the volume of emails is important, but something that can just, ratchet up the weight that your email carries is if you personalize those first few parts and explain, why is this important to you? Who are you? Why do you care? And just add a little bit of flavor to those first couple sentences. So those are all our really quick and easy, like less than 5 minutes menu of options. There's a few options that take more in the 1 to 2 hours, or even something that can take a whole day. So you can testify in Olympia. One of the gifts that COVID bestowed on us is that we can do virtual testimony. So this is something that I did for the first time last year. It's very exciting and a little bit scary. But if you have relevant expertise, which many of you do, on these various bills that are going through the legislature, you can call in and essentially do public comment at the legislature. And again, we will let you know when there are opportunities for that. It can be a really, really powerful and important way to move legislators to support a bill that we want. And we can always help you prepare. Like if you're like, I kind of want to do this, but I don't know what to say, email me and I'll help you. Another thing you can do is you can attend a town hall in your district. You can sign up for emails from your legislators. Again, if you follow that, find your district tool, it takes you to your legislators. You can go to their website and then there's an option to sign up for emails from them. And they will often host town halls in district, so you don't have to go all the way down to Olympia. That can be another really important way to show up in force to support a certain bill or a certain project. And then finally, you can go to Olympia for an advocacy day. This photo in the top right was from Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day last year. This photo was published in the New York Times. I am teeny tiny in the upper left-hand corner with our intern from last year, Kristen. So we were there. It was an awesome event. This is hosted by the Housing Alliance and would definitely love for you to come. You can also get creative and make your baby hold a sign and take a picture of them and put them on the internet or whatever. There's so many other ways that you can speak up during the legislative session. So if I could have one of my colleagues launch poll number 2, I'm just going to ask you about 2 questions. What ways are you going to speak up during the legislative session? And what ways are you going to help other people speak up during the legislative session? And everybody can check the box that says, I will email my electeds, because we're going to do that together in 1 minute. Awesome. We've got a lot of answers rolling in. Let's give folks maybe 30 seconds more to check some of these options. Great. 5 more seconds. Awesome. Okay. Maybe I can show you the answers. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Cool. So we have a lot of commitments to email electeds. Ooh, only 91%. Okay, a couple of you are going to give you a chance to to do that in a minute. A lot of people calling, signing in pro or con. That is super quick and easy. Oh, a handful of people testifying. That is awesome. And great, a lot of people willing to help others take action as well. That is fabulous. That is such an important part of all this is we need you to take action. I think there's about, 40 people in this room right now. And if each of you helps one person, 2 people, 3 people to take action, that is just going to amplify really, really quickly. Okay, so you've got your whole menu of options for ways to engage. I'm going to share a couple of specifics for advocacy days that we have coming up. Poverty Actions is first on the list. They've got their MLK Lobby Day on January 20th. Wyson hosts Immigrant and Refugee Lobby Day on January 30th. We've got the Low Income Housing Alliance's Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day on March 13th. The coalition takes a big old bus down there called the Advocacy Express. We bring service providers and your guests and clients with us. So if you are interested in joining us on the Advocacy Express, please email me. It's going to be an awesome, awesome experience. And then the last one that I've got on my radar is the Mockingbird Society has their Youth Advocacy Day on February 13th. So these are all opportunities to go down to Olympia and join in advocacy. So I want to give folks an opportunity to practice. So we've got 2 options for people to take action together to email their lawmakers. And if I could have my colleagues drop those in the chat. One of them is from us at the coalition to sort of introduce yourselves to your lawmakers and give a high-level list of like, I'm going to be looking for these things in the legislative session, and you will hear from me multiple times. And then the other is the one that Michelle just shared earlier in her presentation. So please take action now with those. And as folks are clicking through, this should take 1 to just a few minutes. I'm going to shut down this slideshow and whoops, did that work? Yeah. And give folks an opportunity to share any updates that they might have for us as a group. And sorry, that was a little bit rushed. Again, we're going to do some more training opportunities throughout the legislative session.
Maybe it's worth saying while people are catching their breath and absorbing all of this, that part of what we're committed to as an organization and what Hallie and Danielle and I have been spending a lot of time thinking through is it's what Hallie said, is not only you all personally taking action, it's amplifying the voices of other people, particularly folks for whom internet service or phone service is not that much of a given. So we're going to do some things to really hear from you all who are direct service providers about how to ensure that the folks you work with get to have their voices heard too. And we really encourage you to reach out to us if you have ideas. I know there are folks at HopeLink and some other agencies that we've partnered with in the past. Justin Miller is here from the HEN program. You all are fantastic at getting the folks you work with and serve involved. And we want to have some mutual learning for you, for us, and for other service providers around the advocacy.
Thank you, Allison. I know Taylor had to
I'm
leave.
here.
Wonderful.
Sorry, I was just waiting for y'all. Hi, thank you. And so I didn't get to hear what y'all said. I had to jump. I was in another meeting, but so QPA is working with Pocan and Entre Hermanos, and we're doing a report out, capital OUP or OUT, because it is about the LGBTQIA community living in South King County. And we did the survey where we collected 200 participants response on economic housing, transportation, health, and civic engagement. And so we're reporting that out. It will be live stream and in person. We'd love people to be there in person because there's going to be opportunities to talk and do more information around that. And live stream won't get as much of that. We're also giving away to what are these called? The tablets at the event. There'll be food provided and all that. It's at Burien. We are asking people, the Burien Public Library, we're asking people to register ahead of time. There's food and all that. But it's really an opportunity to hear the first information around the output of this survey, and the housing and economic was really revealing of how when you are LGBTQ and a person of color, those things, we did the demographic convert and along with these specific areas, how impacted people are. And for an example, 30%, 67% of the people reported that they're paying 30% or more in housing and their paychecks towards housing. And that is, the census says it's 44%. So we know that we're even more impacted. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be sharing at this event. And we will be handing out the information, and then we're going to be putting our report out beginning next year. So hope you can come. I see that Jody put the registration link in there, and please, register ahead of time or just show up. We'd love to see you.
Thank you, Taylor. And I have one quick announcement from one of our partners. There's an annual service of remembrance on Friday, January 3rd at 4 p.m. It's going to be live streamed, but it's also at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church. That's 1215 Thomas Street. And if you have any names of people that you want to add to be remembered, or if you have any questions, you can contact Pastor Christy Daniels. And we'll share that out, all that information out as well when we send our recap.
Great. Thank you all for being here. This was an amazing meeting with lots and lots and lots of information. So if you're like me, go recap it on our YouTube channel. We'll send out a high-level follow-up email with a lot of the links and resources. And yeah, we'll see you in the new year, ready to fight for housing justice, folks. So take care, be well, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Hi, Tim.
I'm going to end the meeting unless somebody wants to take it over because I have an 11 o'clock.